All right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. So today we have our speaker, Ali Tariq. He is presenting his uh, presentation, Standout UX Portfolios. He is the Associate Director of Product Design at Slalom Build in Toronto. And without further ado, I give the floor to him.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And thank you all for having me. And special thanks to George for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to spend some time with you today. So before I get into the thick of things, I'm going to try to see if technology is on our side and see if I can share my screen here. And I was being a bit brave and put together my presentation in Figma today. So crossing my fingers that this works out.
Heck yeah.
All right. Let me come back here. Put this in prototype mode. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, again, thanks for having me over. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a topic that has been coming up a lot lately in my side of things, but also probably on your end as well. And before I, go into the presentation, I do want to preface this by saying that everything I talk about today in terms of designing and shipping a standout portfolio really comes from my own experiences going through it. And there's no real rule book on this type of thing. And so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Some of them may ring truer to you than others, but I think over the years that I've been doing this and I've been seeing and putting together portfolios, I've just gravitated towards some things that I feel like just work better. And so in today's session, I want to share some of those with you. To start off with, my name is Ali Tariq. I've been designing for a little bit more than 10 years now, hard to believe. I actually started in the technical side of things. I was a QA analyst and a developer, got bored of that, then ended up getting my master's degree in business. And then I fell in love with design, as it happens. And so I've been doing that for the last 10 years, and I haven't looked back. Currently, I work at a digital transformation company called Slalom Build. It's essentially a consulting company where we work with clients to put together their digital transformation strategies. So as a designer, I get to go in and work with my clients to figure out how we can mobilize design teams and design processes to help them understand what problems they need to solve and how best to solve them. And then we help them build those things out as well. So that's pretty fun. And as I mentioned before, in my 10 years or so, both as an applicant and as a hiring manager across a variety of different types of companies, both all the way, to large enterprises and corporations, all the way down to startups as well. I've kind of picked up some things that work better about portfolios than others, and I've literally seen hundreds of them. In fact, I was just going through my bookmarks. So I've been bookmarking portfolios for the last handful of years, and I was up to around 350 portfolios just in my bookmarks. And I bookmark portfolios where I see something interesting being done. And so I've tried to distill some of that information into this presentation, and I recognize that 30 minutes is probably not going to do it much justice, but here we are. So to start off with, why do we even need portfolios, right? And if you're currently finding yourself in a position where you're sort of banging your head on the wall, going like, oh my God, my portfolio is never going to get done. And it just feels like a slog. I want you to take heart in recognizing that a lot of people, especially because of the current climate that we're in, and like the job market being the way it is, a lot of hiring managers are kind of cluing into the possibility that perhaps portfolios aren't even needed, right? So I want to, like mention that as a corollary here. That said, our whole presentation is about putting together portfolios. So the majority of the market is still kind of at a place where they expect to see a design portfolio of some sort in some shape or form, because they haven't figured out a better alternative just yet. But there is discourse happening on LinkedIn, on all sorts of social media, on Medium posts, where people are actually debating whether portfolios are even needed. Because people recognize that it takes a lot of effort to put this together. So, just wanted to throw that out there. But given that today a lot of hiring managers and companies do expect some portfolios, really, I think it makes sense to take a step back and think about why we even need a portfolio to begin with, at least today. So I've just kind of distilled it down to these 4 points. Portfolios are a vehicle for you to be able to demonstrate your craft, to demonstrate your thought process, to demonstrate your impact on your projects, and to demonstrate your character as well. So going into that a little bit deeper, when we talk about craft, really the question that the hiring manager is trying to answer is, can they do the job? And as a hiring manager myself, who's recently had to go through a number of portfolios, and who's had to work with other hiring managers on my team, I can tell you that this is by far the very first question that people ask themselves and ask the teams. We kind of, we look at portfolios, we come back in a debrief and we say, do you think this person can do the job? And really that comes down to being able to demonstrate your craft, demonstrate your skills. And your portfolio currently is probably the best way to show this, apart from maybe getting into a conversation with the hiring manager so you can talk and elaborate a little bit more on your projects. But prior to that, you have to be able to demonstrate a certain level of craft and skill in your portfolio that they move you on into the process. From a thought process perspective, let's say you've kind of ticked off the box and it said, oh, you know what, this person seems to have the skills and they seem to have the types of projects that suggest that they have the skills and they have the craft. The next level of question that people typically ask themselves is, well, how does this person actually accomplish the work? How do they do the work? And so it's important to think of your portfolio as again, a vehicle for you to be able to walk people through how you think about problems, how you distill complexity into steps that are actionable, steps that lead to results for the company. Next, speaking about results, is demonstrating your impact, right? So let's say you've convinced people that you have the skills and the craft. You've walked people through a cohesive thought process where things feel deliberate. It's not, you're not just doing things randomly. They eventually then want to ask, well, okay, what difference are they making on their current teams, or what difference have they made on their previous teams and the previous organizations? And in my experience, and I was kind of here too, a lot of people earlier in their career, they stress a lot about impact, right? They go like, well, I haven't had a chance yet to make a big splash. I haven't had that many responsibilities. And so we can end up feeling like our impact is kind of diminished. But I would argue that depending on which level of experience you're coming in at, the impact that you talk about doesn't have to be this like, game-changing, world-altering type of impact. The impact could just be, as small as, I helped improve the morale of my team. Or I learned a new way of doing something, right? So I'd like to kind of encourage you all to reframe and rethink, your understanding of what impact is. As long as there's been some type of positive change by the end of the project, by virtue of you having been on the project, that I feel is like that's worthy impact. The last point here is demonstrating character, right? So the question that people will then eventually ask is, okay, let's, assuming this person has the skills, they think through their process really well, they're able to have good impact, will I actually enjoy working with them? So they're going to want to understand how you work under stress. Have you been like, a lone player for most of your projects, or do you like collaborating with others? Do you seem like you're a fun person to be around, right? So now, all that said, there's a lot of subjectivity here, right? So you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not. That's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying, though, is that it usually works out in your favor for you to demonstrate authentic character, right? Like something about you that sets you apart from everybody else, if for no other reason than just to be memorable. Because think about it, hiring managers go through, like, no kidding, dozens, even hundreds of portfolios. And so your character ends up being a really, really great place for you to stand out from people. So I would heavily encourage you to lean into that. So why do we do all this to begin with, right? So ultimately, it's so that you can convince someone to hire you in order to help them out, right? That's the end goal of a portfolio, especially if you're in, it doesn't matter if you're a freelancer, you're looking for clients, or you're someone who's looking to land their first job. You're eventually trying to convince someone to take a chance on you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the guts of a design portfolio. So there's a lot more to it than these three, but these are the three that I wanted to kind of focus on. So by and large, portfolios typically tend to have a landing page, some case studies, and an About Me page. So the landing page is, exactly what it sounds like. It's the page that you land on as you click into that person's portfolio. So we're assuming here in this particular case that it's a website, but it could also be true for a PDF portfolio, right? Like some sort of a deck that you're sending out to a client. That initial page that people land on is an opportunity for you to attract their attention. So what makes a good landing page, right? So number one is to have a strong and differentiated intro, right? Like, who are you? What's your tagline? So as an exercise, here is a tagline for someone. This is fictional. I made this up. That I'd like you to kind of think about, right? So it says, "Hello, I'm Sam, a UX designer who loves to help problems and help people." Now, I'm kind of curious to hear from you all here. What do you think about this tagline?
It's kind of stale. Feels
Broad.
like exactly what I'd expect.
It sounds broad,
Yeah.
generic.
Yeah, exactly.
Bland.
It's it's what
Sounds
every
like something
UX
I would
designer.
say in bed.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it sounds like something every UX designer would say and agree to, right? Like everybody would want to say that they love solving problems and helping people. But you'll be surprised how often you see taglines like this in portfolios. I see it all the time. And every time I see it, it's not like it's an immediate red flag or anything like that. But I do end up feeling like it was a lost opportunity for someone to really provide a strong intro for me. So let's rework that a little bit, right? So I'd like you to tell me what you think about this tagline. Hello, I'm Sam. I'm a lawyer turned UX designer with an eye for detail and setting actionable product strategies. What do you think about that one?
It's definitely unique in the regard of you have the previous career highlighted. It's something that's just, even if it doesn't contribute to like the work of the person, it's something that like raises an eyebrow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's one that at least at the very least it makes it stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. And a tagline doesn't have to, nail down every single nuance of what you do. But I think the primary intent of a tagline is to stand out, right? Is to let people know and be able to remember remember you for who you are, right? So in this particular case, Sam leaning into the fact that they were a lawyer in a previous life and now have turned into a UX designer, I think is an interesting detail about them that really stands out, and probably very few other candidates will share. And interestingly, beyond that, when you think about a lawyer, for instance, in this case, you'll probably immediately start making assumptions about the person too, right? Like, for instance, yeah, of course, a lawyer would have an eye for detail. They're probably very clear, and so if you're able to make those kinds of positive associations with past experiences or projects to your current role or identity, then I would say lean into that as well. And that's why you'll end up seeing a lot of people say things like, I'm an ex-Amazon person or an ex, this big brand or whatnot, right? Because it ends up lending some type of credibility to their tagline. Here are some real examples of designers out there. So this is from a product designer named Brian. Says he's got 15 years of experience designing in-house within agencies and as a lead designer at startups. So you don't have to have 15 years of experience, but I think the interesting thing here is that they're highlighting the different types of experiences that Brian had. He's saying that he has designed in-house, he's designed in agencies, and as a lead designer at startups, right? So that's kind of interesting. Here's one from a portfolio that I particularly like. He says, I'm Luca Oreo. I'm an Italian designer based in San Francisco. You see that a lot as well. People talk about where they're based. I think that's okay, but again, like unless you're based in a place where you'd think not many other people from that place would be applying, it ends up sounding more of the same. Like I see so many people saying they're from New York. Okay. But what stands out here is that he then says that his process focuses on release cycles and validation, think, build, launch, measure, repeat. This leads me to believe that this person is, very familiar with, and probably also quite enjoys working on almost startup-like or very early stage design projects. So I think that's a really good differentiator too. Coupled with the fact that there's a really high quality image that goes along with it. Here's another example of someone writing a tagline that I thought was memorable. So Yvette says that she's a product designer, born in Manila, raised in California, based in Brooklyn, loves sending letters by post and drinking boba. Now, you could argue that this says nothing about this person's craft or skills or abilities, but it is oozing with character, right? Like it's kind of hard to forget this. There's like really good clean type mixed with, a sense of humor. There's a little bit of whimsy to it with the illustrations. So you don't, there's no one way to craft memorable taglines. So I was just kind of like showing these different variations where you could stand out. Now, that said, in Yvette's case, she still needs to kind of, do the work here to be able to then bridge the gap and say, okay, well, Yvette seems like, a fun-loving person, but can she do the work, right? So number 2, on your landing page, you want to showcase only the most relevant best projects. So here's an example from Tiago, where he's only showing 2 or 3 projects that he's worked on. And that is more than enough. If your projects are the best projects that you've worked on, and they're the best representation of the skills that you want to kind of lead in with, then go with that and stick to like those 2 or 3. On the other hand, here is an example from a designer named Dan Petty, who touts himself as the world's fastest web designer. Now, that may not be true, but his whole brand is about being a really fast, production-heavy designer. So his portfolio is filled with product examples, right? Like a ton of project samples that he's worked on. So I would say if you're starting off, you don't need a whole ton of projects. You only need, a handful of really well-written case studies. Here's a portfolio from one of my previous mentees named Casey. And she kind of, like restricted it to these 4 projects as well. But the way she's laid them out over here are also interesting too, where she's kind of used these small bullet points to basically describe what types of project it is too. So you'll see a screenshot of the project, a quick blurb of what the project is, but then these little pills along the top that tell you specifically like this one has user research as part of it and product design as part of it, and that it's a mobile app and that sort of thing. So that's a really good way to get people to understand what types of projects you're displaying. Third but not least, make it easy to contact you. You'll be surprised how many portfolios I've come across where it was really hard to reach back out to the person who applied, or we come across some freelancers that people send us and I go like, I have no idea how to reach out to this person, or they make you, run through some hoops. So if I may, here's an example from my own website where I've got links along the top to, places where people can find me. And then when you scroll to the bottom of the page, I've got another small form there where I ask people to reach out to me if they're, looking for help with something. And this has worked for me. I get, a number of messages, especially like when I'm in the, job search mode and I'm reaching out to people. I try to make sure that people are able to find me. I also like this from Zulal. His landing page tells you, concisely what he's all about as well. He loves working on interfaces. And also he's got, like a short list of things that he can help out with. And he's got a very easy to find email address right on this homepage, along with some links to his socials. Case studies. I'm going to be a bit mindful of time. I know we're almost at the top of the hour. But case studies are kind of like are really, really important, probably the meat and potatoes of your portfolios, right? The first thing I want to say about case studies is you have to start at the end. That's At least in my experience, I feel like the most impactful case studies that I've come across always start at the end. And what I mean by that is explain what your solution is to me, right? Don't make me guess. Don't make me have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the page or somewhere in the middle of the page to try to understand whether your solution is is it a website? Is it a part of an app? Is it the entire app? So you want to be upfront about that. Here's an example from a design agency named Cuberto. In their case study at the top, they say, very directly that it's an online platform for distance learning, right? No more, no less. And then they've got some high quality, very large imagery to kind of drive that point home. Number two is you want to describe the problem. So I really like this example from a design agency called TM, where at the top of their case study, they've broken down the unique problems that they're focusing on into these small sections here that are very scannable. You don't have to read the entire bit, but you can read the headlines as you're scanning through to be able to understand what they're focusing on. And I think that is hugely valuable. You also want to describe your role. There are so many times in portfolio reviews where me and some colleagues will go through a portfolio, and in our debrief would say, that looks cool and all. I liked how all the, all the screenshots were laid out and the process was laid out, but I have no clarity or have little clarity on what this individual's particular role on the project was. And that's also a missed opportunity. A lot of people don't like, talking in the first person because it feels like they're maybe showing off a little bit, or they're being boastful, or they're, putting the spotlight on themselves. But that's the entire point of your portfolio, right? Is to put the spotlight on yourself and to be able to demonstrate your particular capabilities. So, you'll see people use, this type of methodology where they just very quickly lay out what their particular role on a project was. I think this is fine. This works. I think if you're able to get a little bit more clarity about it in terms of like, what was the makeup of the other people on the team as well, and you don't have to get into a ton of detail about it. In a similar type of format, just talk about, were you the UI designer on the team? Were you the user researcher? And how many other researchers were there? How many other designers were there? How many other developers were there? It just lends a little bit more clarity to the project. Next is, how did you actually go about solving the problem, right? Like, walk me through the process, but you don't have to go into a ton of detail, right? So this one feels like it's going more into a text-heavy category, and I would tend to agree. But what I like about it is that it's easy for me to scan this and be like, okay, so this person had to take some decisions. They had to sketch in the open with people. I don't know what need scope means. I probably need a little bit more clarity. But this general idea of making it easy for me to scan this and follow some type of a skeleton of the process that you went through would be hugely beneficial. Here is another ways, another designer, Tiago Delsin, I think his name was, laid it out where, they just said, in general, these are the 3 phases that I went through. And if you want more information, here is additional detail about each of the phases. But I don't even have to read all this detail here. I can just go, okay, well, yeah, this is neat. It's like he's spread it out into these 3 big phases that I immediately understand. Lastly, but not least, what was the impact and lessons learned here, right? We talked a little bit about impact before. So here's how Tiago, the previous designer, shares his learnings and insights. So again, he's broken it up into these 3 very scannable sections. And I don't have to read these paragraphs here, even though they're not long. but I can scan through them, look at the headlines, and understand the main lessons and insights that he learned. Okay, so here's some examples for you to go through at your own time as well for some case studies that I thought were particularly well done. Okay, I just want to do a quick time check. How are we doing on time? And
So honestly, keep going. This is really good. We typically do like whatever is the leftover time at the end. We'll do some Q&As, but this is great. Keep going, please.
okay, sounds good. Awesome. I think I have around maybe 10 to 12 minutes left.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay.
Let's do it.
All right, so the last part about your case studies that you should pay attention to is that About Me page. And really this kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier about showing character. So in your About page, you want to do these three things. You want to tell your unique story, right? Like and again, you don't have to, like write a novel here. But your story is unique to yourself. There's nobody else who can have that story, right? So share it, even if it means having to talk a little bit about, what life was like before being a UX designer. Were you a lawyer? Were you a chef? Those are all interesting things that you can kind of bring into your story that will help you stand out. Number two is highlight your specific skills and interests, right? Like, do you feel like you're really good at communication? Are you really good at putting together slide decks? There's a ton of transferable skills that you can bring from other disciplines into UX design. So lean into that and use that to your advantage. And lastly, but not least, if you're willing to share this, I think it makes a difference to talk a little bit about your values and your principles as a designer, but also just as a human being, right? What are some things that you care about? And if you're able to use examples to kind of bring that to light, even better. Here's an example from Elizabeth Lynn. In fact, you know what? Let me see if I can actually walk you through it. So really like this About Me page. It just right away, demonstrates that this person is, again, a little bit whimsical. She was right off the bat, talking about being really interested in anything fashion related. She teaches design, has links to places that demonstrate what she's teaching, talks about what kind of books she likes. She's into origami, right? There's a ton of things in here that, make her who she is. And she's got like these unique kind of elements. And like, there's no wrong way to do this, right? As long as you're being authentic to who you are, it'll shine through to the hiring manager. So let's go back here. And to kind of contrast that with another example, here's an example from a designer named Lalit. And he goes a slightly different direction. His is a little bit more, formal, right? Like, and this is to show that, you don't have to be off the wall in order to be memorable, right? In his case, he's choosing to be clean. He talks very directly about the types of skills that he's interested in or considers himself an expert at. And he has this, this resume or CV type of timeline of the things that he did in his past before his current role. So I think this is even, effective. So you don't have to like pour your heart and soul into the About page, but just making it easy for people to understand you for who you are. All right. So, okay, we're going on to the last section of the presentation. where I talk about the 3 types of portfolios you'll likely ever need. And before I talk about that, I want to kind of zoom out and recognize that the job search process is probably really where you'll be needing a portfolio the most. And if you were to kind of like map that out in a timeline, I would say at the beginning of this process, after you kind of kick off that job search, you're probably going to be sending in a bunch of applications to a number of places. Either you're doing it through job boards like LinkedIn Jobs or Indeed, or you're going onto the websites of companies and going directly into their job boards and applying there. That instance where you're sending in your application is probably that first instance where you're going to be leaning into a portfolio of some type. And then all the way at the end of the process, you're hopefully going to be having an interview where you're going to be asked to walk the hiring manager or managers through your portfolio. And in between these 2 steps, you're probably going through things like, you're having an HR call, you're getting that initial call from the recruiter, you're having some back and forth and some rapport with the company that you're applying at. So these 2 places where you end up using a portfolio, you'll probably be ending up using 2 very different types of portfolios too. So that first one I like to call that first portfolio and that first phase I like to call the eye catcher, right? So the goal of the eye catcher portfolio is to grab attention and to get that first call, right? You want people to want to reach out to you because they saw something interesting on your portfolio. In this particular case, the visuals of that portfolio are probably going to be on the higher side, right? You probably want it to be more visual than textual. So the way I like to think about that is that 60 to 70% of your portfolio is likely going to be made up of high quality visuals, where the remaining 30 to 40% is going to be made up of text. And usually the format of this portfolio is a website, although again, it could be a PDF that you're sending over to people. I've definitely done that in the past a number of times. And in this particular case, your portfolio from a words perspective, it isn't that dense, right? I've seen portfolios where, again, it almost feels like you're reading a novel. And to be sure, some of them are amazing, right? Some of those portfolios are really, really well written, but I would say it's not required. For that eye catcher type of portfolio, you want to keep it somewhere between 250 to 500 words, roughly speaking. So switching over to that last type of portfolio where you're kind of like walking them through a presentation, I like to call that type of portfolio an entertainer portfolio. So the goal of that portfolio is to pass your interview and to get a job offer, right? So really it's about engaging people. It's about having, it's almost like, watching a good episode of a show, right? So especially if you consider the fact that hiring managers at that phase of the interview, they're probably maybe got half a dozen interviews to go through, perhaps even more than that, right? Maybe more than 10 interviews that they're going through. So they're sitting through these like 30-minute, portfolio presentations. If you think about it from that perspective, really the best way to stand out in that scenario is to be entertaining, right? Now that said, that doesn't mean you need to not do your work justice. It just means you need to present it a little differently. So in this particular case, the visuals are taking the front seat again, but even more so. So I would say like 70 to 80% of those presentations are probably going to be very visual, and they're going to be very low on text. And these formats, I would highly recommend you to use, PowerPoint decks or Keynote decks for these, and avoid using a website. I've been in a number of interviews where the candidate opens up their website and they scroll through their website, and ends up not being a very good experience. You end up having to jump back and forth. The format of the website generally does not lend itself well to presenting an interesting presentation. And so I would say you typically want to have a separate version of your portfolio in a slide deck format. And usually these decks are around 10 to 20 slides. Although depending on the project and depending on how much time they give you, you could even have like 10 to 20 slides per case study as well. Although I feel like 20 slides is probably too much per case study. So there's a third potential type of portfolio that you probably need to be aware of as well. And I call this the educator portfolio. So let's say you're at the beginning of a job interview process. You apply for a job, or a recruiter reaches out to you and convinces you to apply, and they say, hey, could you send over your portfolio? You may say something like, oh, well, I've got my portfolio online. You can take a look at that. And sometimes they'll say, yeah, that's good enough. But if they feel like there's not enough detail about your process or about your story in your web portfolio, they may ask for something a little bit more detailed. And I think this is really the best place. I'm not going to say it's the only place, but it is the best place, I think, to have a portfolio ready where you've got more text available. And the reason why is because it's going to land in the hands of a hiring manager who's going to want to go through it and be able to understand the PowerPoint presentation without having you be there, right? So it has to be kind of self-explanatory. And at this stage, they've explicitly asked for a little bit more information. So in the educator type of portfolios, the visuals and the text usually are kind of 50-50, right? So I would still say, though, that the visuals need to, be a little bit more than text, because at the end of the day, hiring managers are super busy. They're going to be scanning through a lot of this. So a visual format still, I think, wins. But there is more text here to be able to describe in detail the story of how you went through. The educator portfolio is also a format that is worth sending out after your final interview. Let's say you have that final interview, and they'd reach out to you again and say something like, hey, do you mind shooting over your portfolio to us? If you send them that entertainer portfolio, it's going to be very heavy on visuals and very scant on text. So it may not be, it may not do justice to your case study. That's where an educator type of format will come in handy as well. Okay. All right, lightning round. Let's do this. Common mistakes that I've seen. Trying to be too fancy, right? Like, don't be fancy when it comes to portfolios. Keep it simple. Use simple typography. Use simple colors. I would say, if possible, try to even limit your colors to 2 or 3 colors. Use simple UI. You don't have to get super fancy about it, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is people try to be memorable with their designs, and they go overboard, and it ends up being really tough to navigate. Using subpar imagery, right? We talked a lot about how portfolios need to have a lot of visuals in them. So it goes without saying, make sure the images that you use are, high quality. They're not pixelated. They're not blurry. They're not hard to understand or read. Don't be afraid to also use big imagery. I see a lot of times, and I'm not sure why, I see a lot of times people try to cram as many images as they can into a small space. It becomes a bit more understandable, I guess, if you're putting together a deck. But even then, I think it's much more effective to pick, the 2 or 3 screens that you think best represent the story, and make them big, right? So people aren't squinting and things don't feel like they're overcrowded. Oh, this is a problem I see all the time. People don't use enough white space. Again, this issue of like trying to cram in so many things. You don't have to, right? Let it breathe. Let your content breathe. Space things out. Use the blank areas to kind of give people a little bit of a break for their eyes as well as they're going through it. Because if their eyes are resting, they're also cognitively resting too. And it makes it much easier to process your portfolio. Similar type of theme here, making it hard to scan, right? So we talked a little bit about how using proper headlines, using visuals in the right way can help someone who's in a rush to go through it and be able to quickly understand and interpret the work that you did. Pair this with the fact that there's research to suggest that it takes people around half a second to make an impression of a website, right? So because of that, you want to make things clean, you want to make things simple, and you want to make things easy to scan. And certainly as a hiring manager, as I go through a number of portfolios, I can tell you from personal experience that I probably need maybe like a minute and a half, maximum 2 minutes to really, have a confident type of initial assessment as to whether that portfolio is, or that application is a go or no go, right? Which sounds terrible. I get it. And as a candidate, it's kind of like a tough pill to swallow as well. Because you end up spending hours putting together your portfolio. It doesn't seem to be fair that it takes people around less than 2 minutes to make a judgment about it. But that's the reason why just keep things, super simple, super easy to scan, and easy on the eyes. This issue comes up all the time, not being clear about your contributions, right? We talked about this. Do not underplay your contributions in your role on projects. You can't have an interview without an eye. So talk about yourself. Showing too many projects, right? Like, so I would say stick to your best 1 to 3. You don't need a ton of projects. If you can, show a variety of projects in those 1 to 3, right? Like maybe one of them is a website, the other one is a mobile app. That's fine. If you can do that, that's cool. If not, that's okay too. But do make sure that you're representing work that you feel proud about. This is also a big problem, right? Like people put off portfolios because they think it's not perfect. But the truth is that the best portfolio you have is the one that you actually have. And if you don't have one, then you're not making any progress at all, right? Like if you don't have a portfolio out there, there's literally no way for someone to find you unless you reach out to people. But even then, they're going to ask you for a portfolio, so might as well be ready. Don't wait for it to be perfect, because I would say consider a portfolio as a work in progress. It's always going to get updated. It's always going to change. So hopefully that was helpful, and I hope that gives you some tips and tricks, and hopefully some inspiration to get your own journey going about putting your portfolios together. Feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm quite active on Twitter, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'll be happy to send out this slide deck. I just need to put together some attributions and some of those screenshots, and I'll be happy to send them out either to maybe through George or directly on the group. So, thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Ali. That was a fantastic presentation. I have one question and then I'll kick it off. When you're looking at portfolios, are you mainly looking at them through your computer screen or your phone?
Good question. I would say 98% of the time on my laptop.
Okay.
Yeah. There has been a couple of times when, let's say, I'm in between calls, and definitely hasn't been the case since remote work kind of happened. But when I was in the office and I was in between calls, going from one place to the other, if I'm like walking towards like an interview, and I have 5 minutes or something, I would pull out my phone and try to look at someone's portfolio on my phone. But that was, I would say, rare.
Okay. Second question. You said you were talking about contacting people in the beginning. I'm curious, like, what's your preferred method? Either would you rather submit a form, or would you rather email someone if they have their email, or would you call someone? Does anyone call?
I don't think I've ever called anyone like out of the blue.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever called anyone like a cold call, but my primary way of reaching out to people is through LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So I would, let's say I, look or I find a job that took my interest in a certain company. I would then go to LinkedIn. I would try to do a little bit of research on the design team at that company. If it's not clear who the hiring manager is, I'll just, pick someone who I think maybe is of the appropriate seniority on that team. I'll reach out to them and I'll tell them, hey, I saw an interesting opportunity and I'd like to learn a little bit more about the company and the problems they're working at before I actually apply, right? Because I want to ensure that the application I send in feels bespoke to that opportunity. So I try to tailor all of my applications, including my portfolios, to the opportunities that I'm applying for.
That's good to know. If no one else has a question, I'll ask another question.
I kind of want to ask something. So when I was doing my portfolio, some stuff I was like, oh, well, that's going to be in the cover letter or that's going to be in my resume, so I don't need to put it on the portfolio. Do you have any insight on that, like stuff that doesn't need to be on the portfolio because you're already going to see it? Because I even thought of that with the contact information. I was like, oh, well, my contact information is already in my resume. Why do I need to put it on the portfolio unless I just want weirdos to spam me?
So in this particular case, are you referring to a portfolio online then?
Like a website. I was just afraid if I have a website up and I have my email address sitting there, and obviously I shouldn't. I guess if you're not going to call anybody, don't put my phone number on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I respect people's right to privacy, right? Like if people are not comfortable sharing their contact info on a public site, that's fine by me. But I think you need to have some type of alternative, right? Like maybe it's a link to your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm saying like where you were talking about the guys like, oh, I'm a lawyer I'm like, oh, yeah, I would have put that on my cover letter that I used to be a lawyer rather than just having that as right. Saying it works then. Yeah, I mean, I think it, again, there's no hard and fast rule. I think it doesn't hurt to have them in both places. The way I look at cover letters, and I know a lot of people kind of poo-poo cover letters too, but I actually find it an interesting opportunity for me to, again, try to grab someone's attention. So because you were talking about not having too much text, so like then I'm like, okay, so If I feel like I have too much text on my portfolio, should I put that in the cover letter instead? I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I think if your cover letter ends up reading and looking the same as your portfolio, then there's no point in having two different things. So usually my cover letter looks very different from my portfolio in that it's very condensed, right? Like my cover letters are 3 paragraphs long. They're very punchy, and they're almost like salesy. I'll admit, like this is how I can help you kind of thing. My portfolio tends to be a little bit more. It is more focused on it's like some specific skills and whatnot. So there's definitely going to be some overlap. But the way I think about my cover letter is, what can I mention on my cover letter that is not mentioned in my resume, right? So I don't want my cover letter to be a repeat of my resume. But can I add a little bit more color to it so that it makes it a little bit more I guess more urgent and more eye-catching.
So I've got a question from Rahina. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's kind of a long question, but we'll see if we can do it. Have you come across portfolios for aspiring UX researchers? What about those portfolios make them different from design, and any tips for beginners?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's in fact something that George and I talk a lot about as well, because his specialty is also in the research side of things. I'll be honest, I haven't come across that many, but that doesn't necessarily mean they don't exist or they're not out there. It's just so happens that the roles I've hired for have been largely like generalist product designer kind of roles, where we expect a certain level of research capabilities. Certainly, we don't expect them to be experts or have deep research knowledge, but a certain level of research or comfort with research as well as interaction design. So I've personally not come across too many of them. But that's not to say that they're not out there. And I think everything we've talked about today, almost everything anyway, still applies to research portfolios.
I think so. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ali. This was fantastic.
We have one more question from Elmer real quick.
Hey, yes. Sorry, I didn't type it. Is that okay? So just as a quick question, Ali, and I promise it's short, from the perspective of someone who is doing hiring and analysis. So I get the place where you're at, and I think the 2 minutes is generous, good on you, for going through portfolios. Does that assume that you've done a degree of filtering at the resume and cover letter level? So speaking to that, are there any other pieces pre-portfolio that people should be putting extra effort into in order to make sure that they get to that next step?
That's a fantastic question. And I was trying to kind of fit that into my presentation, but it was going to get long. Yes. So a big thing you can do, and we talked a little bit about it in my previous answer, is do the prior research on the opportunity that you're applying for, right? So again, let's say you come across an opportunity at a company that really piques your interest. Study the job description. Look at the phrasing of the words that they're using. What are specific skill sets that they're highlighting? And as you do that kind of like filtering of that job description, go back into your resume, into your cover letter, into your portfolio, and make the necessary tweaks to ensure that you're speaking directly to that opportunity. And that will help you stand out. So I don't do the initial filtering when it comes to filtering job applications out. That's the responsibility of the talent acquisition team. But that's what they're looking for, right? Like they're looking for the match between the keywords and the skill sets that is in the job description versus what has been highlighted in the resumes and the cover letters and the portfolios that have been sent through. I'll also note that usually talent acquisition teams are not that versed in being able to assess a portfolio. All they really want to know is whether a portfolio was supplied, and then they pass that portfolio over to us. But what they do spend a lot of time on is that the match between your application and the job description. So so use that as kind of like your radar. And you don't even have to wait until you find that perfect job opportunity either, right? Like, let's say you want to get into UX research. So go onto LinkedIn, go onto Indeed or wherever these job postings are, company websites, and try to read as many job descriptions for UX research roles. And as you read them, mine for those like those keywords that that tend to be coming up often, and use that to your advantage by tailoring your messaging and your positioning towards those skills.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I think that is a nice conclusion to our session. Thank you so much again. Thank you everyone for joining us.
For sure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All the best in your journeys.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.